Good evening. Welcome to Getting Started with Schoolnet 21.0. I am Pam Batchelor from NCDPI, Digital Teaching and Learning on the home base team, the product manager for Schoolnet. And with me tonight, I have two wonderful superheroes.
Hi, this is Jill Darrow. I'm also from Digital Teaching and Learning. I coordinate professional learning for the Digital Learning Initiative, and I also serve the Southeast as their consultant. Great to have you guys on the webinar tonight.
And I'm Kathy Parker, also with the Division of Digital Teaching and Learning. I am the Sand Hills Regional Consultant for the division, and I also support school library media for the state, and I am glad to be here supporting y'all tonight.
Yes, so we're excited to have Jill and Kathy with us tonight to help with questions and help put things in the chat. We do have a chat feature in the GoToWebinar where you can find links, including a link to tonight's presentation. And it's going to be very important that you join this presentation with me. The bit.ly is right here on the screen. You do have to type this into your browser in order to open up the slide deck. So I appreciate you taking a minute right now. And we're going to do a quick sound check. If you can hear me, if you could raise your hand in the attendee panel, the little hand icon, just to make sure we're all working good. Wonderful. I'm going to lower the hands, and if you could raise your hand again, if you can see my screen. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'm going to exit out of the presentation mode just for a second because I want to show you if you have got that link from the chat or if you've got the link from the screen and you've typed it in, you are actually in a Google slide deck, and you can actually share or save this Google slide deck to your account. So on your device, if you're logged into Google, you'll see buttons kind of similar to mine. If you have a sign in button in the top right corner, you need to do that so that way you can save this presentation. And how you do that is you go under File and you go to Make a Copy. So if you'd like to save a copy of this presentation, the slide deck, to your Google Drive so that way you'll have it forever, because we know how busy the beginning of the school year is, and you might get some great ideas tonight and then get caught up in everything that happens at the beginning of the year. We do want you to make sure you have this presentation. So if you're on your phone, it might be a little difficult to do, but there should be some three dots. And I'm an iPhone user, and on the bottom of my Google Slides, it shows three little dots, and it says that I can make a copy. Another option to save this presentation is simply to add a bookmark to whatever web browser you're in, whether it's Chrome or Safari. So those are a couple of different ways to save the presentation if you would like. So I'm going to hop back into present mode. Yep, and so with the bit.ly link, anybody with the link can view. You don't have to be signed in. So if you don't see your name up at the top, it's probably just because you're viewing the screen as kind of an anonymous viewer. So, all right. We're going to go over our topics for today. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is Schoolnet, how to get around and navigate Schoolnet, some of the information that you can find right from the homepage in Schoolnet. Then we're going to also take a look at finding instructional materials as well as assessment items. So everyone kind of knows Schoolnet for assessments, but there's a lot of really good instructional materials available in Schoolnet as well. So we're going to go over those. And then I also have some resources with how-to guides for how to do everything. This webinar is going to give you kind of an overview of Schoolnet, kind of the airplane view, and then some of our other webinars later in the year are going to be much more focused on just one aspect of Schoolnet. So this is kind of the airplane view, and then later on in the year we'll dive into some specific topics. So this is a good general overview of everything that's in Schoolnet. All right. So a couple of CEU questions just to go ahead and clear this up and get it out of the way. For logging in tonight in the live webinar, GoToWebinar keeps track of who attends, and we'll keep track of it. And within 5 business days, you're going to get an email from me with a copy of your CEU certificate. You'll get that certificate will be for 0.1 CEU, and the credit will be recommended for digital learning competency credit. However, that justification for what type of credit is up in the final approval. It needs to go through your local process at your charter school or through your district. So the final recommendation or approval of credit is up to them. For that digital learning competency credit, you should provide some type of artifact or reflection. So maybe a screenshot of a lesson or assessment that you're building out in Schoolnet, along with a reflection of how Schoolnet's going to help you reach your instructional goals this year. So you have to be logged into the live webinar, which you all are if you use the link from the registration. And then lastly, you can only receive credit for 1 webinar per topic. So for example, today we also had this webinar at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. So if you attended one of those earlier sessions and you're attending now, you would only get credit for 1 of the webinars. Lastly, all of our webinars are recorded, and our webinars are recorded, and you'll be able to review the recording, so that way you can have more time for practice later on. All right. How are we doing, ladies? Doing good so far?
We're good.
Yep.
All right, awesome, thank you. So just to throw out a statistic for you, last year there were over 14 million assessments submitted in Schoolnet and across the state of North Carolina. So of course that usage does vary from district to district and school to school, even within districts. Some have great use of Schoolnet and use it all the time. Others may not even know it exists. So it is part of the home-based suite of applications with the opt-in, which means that your district or charter school pays $1 per student for the year to have access to Schoolnet, as well as the professional development office in NESIS, which is for our evaluations. For tonight, we're going to be using the training site. You are welcome to log in to your live production version of Schoolnet by going into the NC Ed Cloud and using your UID and password. So a little bit of a quiz as we get back from summer. If you want to log in with your UID and password, and instead of clicking on the Power Teacher icon that you're probably used to, you're going to click on the Schoolnet icon, which is the little red house. Or you can join me and using the training site. I'm using the training site because the data is anonymous, so I'm going to be using that, but you are welcome to also go in your live site if you would like to see how it looks with your actual production site. So I believe Kathy or Jill is going to be typing in this information into the chat, so that way you can copy and paste it, or you're welcome to go into your live site. So
Yes, and I put that in the chat.
thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
There we go. Sure. All right, so I'll let the home page load for just a second. So if you're with me in the training site, you'll see a screen that looks identical to mine. If you are in your live site, you are going to see, instead of welcome back teacher, you'll see welcome back in your name. You should see when your last visit was to Schoolnet, what your role is, and then your school name. So if you have a role that's something different than teacher, or if your school is incorrect, maybe you've transferred schools over the summer, you need to go see your data manager at your school, because the roles for Schoolnet are actually set in PowerSchool. And so if there's been any changes to your role or your school, your data manager needs to make those changes in PowerSchool, and then it takes an overnight sync to take effect in Schoolnet. It doesn't change your functionality for right now, though. Even if you even if it shows you at an incorrect school, it'll be okay for tonight's purposes, and then you can just get that fixed with your data manager before the beginning of the year. Are there any questions?
So far, so good. I don't see
Awesome.
any questions.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to go over the homepage a little bit and some of the features on it. On the right side on the top is kind of a message or update center there. We call it a splash page. And so there was an update to Schoolnet over the summer. And so this little landing page area has some links and information. There's also a what's new button. That'll kind of walk you through some of the highlights of what's new in the upgrade over the summer. And then on the left side, you'll see a link to Schoolnet, which is our application for if you're going to be scanning bubble sheets. And then a calendar, which is linked to our lesson planner feature in Schoolnet. So Schoolnet does have a built-in lesson planner where you can schedule instructional materials within Schoolnet, or you can add links and upload files from your computer or wherever you have your lesson plan stored. The nice thing about using the lesson planner on Schoolnet is that your administrator at your school has access to your lesson planner, so they can see what you have pulled up. So I'm going to scroll down just a little bit to this choose a section. And you'll notice that for the training site, this particular teacher is a social studies teacher. You may, if you're on your live site, you may not have anything in this box. It might be blank. And that is simply because classes may not have started. So as I've mentioned before, all the data from Schoolnet comes from PowerSchool, and so until the first day of classes in PowerSchool, you won't have any classes in Schoolnet or students in Schoolnet. That first day of school, everything kind of magically syncs, and all of a sudden everything populates. So don't think anything's wrong if you look and either you see students maybe from last year or you don't see any students at all. Just let that know that in the first day of school, it's going to sync and all be correct. So for this particular teacher on the training site, I'm going to pick one of their sections, and then further down the screen, I'm still just on the home page, there's a classroom assessment monitor. So this classroom assessment monitor generates some lovely data every time students take a test. Right, so for this particular example, for the social studies, she has a district benchmark, right? So a district benchmark is comparing her sections, so her classes of world history to the school's classes of world history to the district's classes of world history. Also over here to the right in the box, you'll see there's 5 reports that are generated automatically every time you give an assessment in Schoolnet, whether it's a 5-question formative assessment or a 30-question end of unit test. These 5 reports generate just the same based on that content. And we will be going into these reports in our next webinar series in September. So if you are kind of interested in diving more into those reports, make sure that you sign up for the webinar in September. All right. So I'm just going to continue scrolling down a little bit, and I'll see my list of students in this course. And you'll notice that I can see their scores and their score groups here for this particular assessment. And then over to the right of each student is kind of a bar graph. And this bar graph only has 2 points of data on it right now, but this is kind of our trend field in Schoolnet. So it tells us the last 10 assessments a student has taken. So just from looking at this trend data, I can quickly see how students are performing on their Schoolnet assessments, and which students I may, need to reach out to and see what's going on, or which students are progressing and getting better as time goes along. For this example, there's only 2 tests, so we only have 2 scores. All right. How are we doing with questions?
We're still good.
Awesome. Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and click on one of these students down here beneath the test scores. So you can click on anything in Schoolnet that's a blue. That actually means it's a link, and you can actually drill down into it. So I'm going to click on this student here, and that's going to pull up the student profile. So I'm going to give it just a second to load, and this is going to give me more detailed information about the student, information that would probably be very valuable to have at the beginning of the school year. All right, so the student profile has loaded, and they are different tabs of information. All of this information comes from PowerSchool, but I prefer how Schoolnet lays it out. I think it's much more organized and user-friendly than trying to go through PowerSchool to dig it all out. So we start with just overview of personal information, contact information, the current enrollment for the student's current classes, what they're enrolled in, their semester grades, if we're far enough along in the semester for there to be semester grades, will be displayed there. And then any district assessments that the student has taken will be displayed there.
And we have 2 questions.
Okay.
And this was, may have to go one step back when you were showing the students. Is it possible to resort them in ascending order?
I don't believe so. So you'll notice in the training site, the students are kind of all randomized. When you look at them, so you have, if you scroll a little bit further down on classroom profile, this is kind of where you can sort. So there's a student name, and you can sort them, and this kind of looks a little bit better in your live site because it doesn't have these random, it has their first and last names. So you can sort them there on the classroom profile. I hope that's helpful.
All right, another question we have is, can you go back and show how to get to the lesson plans again?
Yeah, so it's actually, so you can go through it through the calendar on the homepage, but you can also on the left side, on the blue, and I haven't gotten over there yet, under the classroom module, you can see lesson planner. So I was going to point that out in a minute, but that's a good little sneak peek. So I'm going to go back and load that student's profile by just clicking on any student. All right, so once I've looked at their overview, I can also go in and look at standardized tests. And there's this nifty little show filters button that I was having a senior moment earlier and forgot about. And it allows you to pull down prior year's information. So you can click and look at standardized test scores going back different years in the student's history. Right, so I can see this particular student, what they, on their last year's, they're in 9th grade, so last year's scores would be for 8th grade. So what their 8th grade reading, math, and science EOGs were. The next tab is discipline data. That's only for administrators at the school, so your principals and assistant principals. But I think the next tab is probably the most powerful tab, because as a teacher, a lot of times we have students that are new or students that are transferring in, and this enrollment and academic record goes back as long as the student was within North Carolina. It goes back, I think, 6 years now, and you can see all of their absences for that history of time. And then if you keep scrolling down, you'll actually can see their academic record with their final grades for that period of time. All right. Any questions?
So one question is, what does the scale score mean?
So scale score is just that actual score. So let me go back. Right? So that's their actual numerical score that they made. And I know for specific tests, the scale scores make different cuts for the achievement levels. So I can't remember off the top of my head, but I remember teaching middle school, and a certain scale score was the cutoff for like difference between a 3 and a 4. So that's why they include the actual numerical score when it comes over from PowerSchool.
That's the only question we have about content. We do have a few people that are saying they can't hear, but I'm trying to help with that.
Okay. All right, well, let's do a quick check. If you can hear me, and you can hear Jill just a second ago, if you could raise your hand again, just to make sure it's not a widespread issue. Okay, so it is looking like most people can hear. Thank you for that. And thank you, Jill and Kathy, for troubleshooting with those folks having the issue.
All right, next question. Is Schoolnet in sync with PowerSchool?
It's 1 day behind. So every night there's a sync between PowerSchool and Schoolnet. So any changes in PowerSchool today will be reflected in Schoolnet tomorrow. All right, so going back through, I went through enrollment and academic record. Now I'm going to go into programs. If the student was enrolled in any programs such as special ed, gifted and talented, LEP, that information would be on this tab. And then the next 2 tabs are the benchmark tests and classroom tests that the student has taken at Schoolnet. And again, you have that awesome show filters button if you want to drill back to earlier years. And you can see what the student has scored on tests in Schoolnet, right? So this is not all tests, this is just specifically Schoolnet. So if your district or school doesn't use Schoolnet very much, you're not going to see much data here, but hopefully that'll change. And this is a great resource for, before parent phone calls or just goal planning with your students, to kind of help them see where they've been and where they need to go. So just a nice little awesome feature to be able to see their benchmark tests and their classroom test results. All right, so the next tab in Schoolnet is one that not a lot of people use. However, I do think it has a very good potential for use, and that is the learning plan and teacher's notes. So this is a point where you can add notes to the student's profile as their teacher. So things like parent contact, strengths, opportunities for improvement, any type of interventions or remediation strategies you may have found successful with that student. You can also upload student work samples to this page. So this is a page that's visible to teachers of that student as well as administrators at the school. And it does go back. So anything information that you add this year, the teachers next year would be able to see about their student. I just think about how helpful this would have been for me as a classroom teacher, to know exactly what to work and what learns, because that's my biggest struggle every year, because I get a new group of students. So I have to find, what works for them, what their preferences are, what their learning style is. And so if this information could kind of be captured, it would just, help that relationship start on a much more positive note.
All right, Pam, we have a question.
Okay.
Do parents have access to Schoolnet data for their children?
So what parents can see is through the Power Teacher Pro gradebook. However, Power Teacher Pro, the scores that come are actual links. So depending on your test settings, so when you set up an assessment, there are some options for how much parents and students can see. So like if you wanted them to see the test questions, they could. If you wanted them to see the correct answers to the test, they could. Or maybe you just want them to see the score, then that's all they're going to see. So it's kind of customizable up to the teacher. But you can see that also it's very easy to export any of this data. You notice there's a create PDF link on every one of these pages in the student profile. There's also a create PDF for every one of the reports that you can generate in Schoolnet. So it's easy to kind of export some of this data and have it ready for a parent conference or to send home with your students.
So another clarifying question, Pam. Kimberly is wondering if the parent contact log feeds into the report cards, the one that's in the conference box.
It does not. So our sync with PowerSchool is one way. So all of the information comes from PowerSchool, and the only thing that feeds back into PowerSchool are grades. Everything else stays within Schoolnet. So anything other than a grade doesn't go back. It's just within the system.
Would that be the same thing for disciplinary incidents?
So disciplinary incidents are strictly from PowerSchool. You can't enter a discipline incident into Schoolnet. It's literally just showing you like a mirror of what's in PowerSchool.
Okay. And for customizable options, can they be set up to be time activated, like the correct answers available at a certain date and not before? Or is there a simple switch that can be used when the evaluation is created?
Okay, so I believe this question that Eric is asking is talking about for parents and for like student access. So there is, when you schedule the test, you can hold the test information until after a certain date. So let's say, for example, you don't want the students to be able to see the correct answers or the questions of a test until 2 weeks later, because you want to make sure everyone has time to take the test. You can set that date for that kind of information. I'm hoping that's what Eric was meaning.
All right, and then Richard asked the questions for NC check-ins. Parents are only allowed to view the questions in person. Is that correct? They cannot see the data over Schoolnet, correct?
Yes, so NC check-ins are not given in the Schoolnet, and so the test questions are not in Schoolnet in any way. So there's no way that a parent would see NC check-ins questions in Schoolnet.
All right, I think that's it for questions for right now.
Okay, great, thank you. So the last tab we're going to talk about on the student profile is one specific to Schoolnet, and that is called TestNav Personal Needs Profile. So TestNav is the name of the test tunnel that we use for students to take assessments online. Schoolnet does allow for accommodations, so including color contrast, answer masking, line reader, magnifier, and text to speech, which is also read aloud, as well as extended testing time. So what needs to happen in order for students to receive these accommodations is first, their profile must be marked with those accommodations according to their IEP or 504 plan. So in this example, this student gets read aloud. One teacher of that student has to mark this profile with what their accommodations are, and then the rest of the teachers will not have to do that step because only one teacher has to mark the student's profile. What does have to happen is that when you create a test, there's a box for accommodations and you have to enable those accommodations. So enabling the accommodations on the test allows students with those accommodations marked in their profile to receive those accommodations on the test. And there's actually an accommodations tracker on every test. There's like a report that shows which students used which accommodations during the test. So that's a great piece of information to collect. Any questions coming in about that? I'll give a second.
All right, Pam, can teachers' notes be printed?
So I'm assuming they're talking about the learning plan and teacher's notes. And that page did have a create PDF button, so you could generate that PDF of that page and print it.
All right, one other question. Can a random incorrect answer be removed from the evaluations questions?
I'm not sure I understand that completely.
I think, Eric, I think you're saying if it had 4 answer choices, can you make it just so that it has 3 answer choices? Yes, that is a possibility.
Yes. When you edit the test questions, it actually is making a copy of the questions in the bank, and you can edit them. So you can remove one of the answer choices if they just needed 3 answer choices. Yes, you can definitely do that. You can also change anything. Thank you, Jill, for helping me.
So just a good rule of thumb. When I used to make my own assessments, I would make my base assessment for my 80% of my class, 70 to 80% of my students, and then I would make 2 copies. One copy for my students that needed only 3 answer choices, and then 1 copy for my students that were AG that I needed to make the questions a little more rigorous. So I typically, rule of thumb, made 3 assessments.
Yeah, and that's something that's really easy to do in Schoolnet. You just make your base, your copy there, and then just make a copy of that assessment for whichever group.
And then we have one question about translating for ESL students. That's actually something they can do in their browser. Is that correct, Pam?
So there's a couple of different options. We have actually Spanish items in Schoolnet. There's about 30,000 Spanish items. So you can actually create a test with Spanish items. And then for you personally, if you're not fluent in Spanish, your browser, when you load the Spanish items, will detect that it's a different language and actually ask if you want to translate the page. So that way you can check the content of the questions, but they're still going to be in Spanish for students. And if you add Spanish items to a test and the student needs read aloud, they actually will be read aloud in Spanish. So just a thought there, that the read aloud feature, as long as you're using Spanish items, will read items in Spanish to students. All right. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to click on the home button, which is the little crooked red house there. And that's just going to take me back to the home screen. And I'm going to go over this menu that's on the left-hand side. So if you'll notice in the very top corner of the left side, there's 3 dots or 3 lines, depending on what view you have it on, that will expand the modules within Schoolnet. So the top one is a KPI dashboard. What that is some basic data points about your school or your district. So it has things like your current enrollment, some scores. If it's before the start of the school year, your KPI dashboard may look inaccurate or blank, and that's because it hasn't been the first day of school yet. All that data comes over from PowerSchool, so your KPI dashboard should look accurate after the first day of classes. The next module is reporting, and this is what we're going to dive into in September's webinar, but this is where you can access all the reports, all of your historical data. So over the summer, Schoolnet does kind of a refresh for the beginning of the new year, but all of your old data can still be accessed by going into this reporting dashboard, right? And then the next module is classroom. And within the classrooms module, we have that lesson planner that we mentioned earlier. We have student workspaces, which is a space where you can actually build portfolios with your students in Schoolnet. The nice thing is you know, the workspaces continue with the student throughout their whole educational career, so they could be loading things up into Schoolnet across many years. And then there's also student groups, and student groups are a way for teachers to organize their students. It's not something that you can use to assign like a task to a group of students. It's more like for your kind of organization and putting students in groups kind of based on what their needs are. And then under instructional materials, this is where you'll find all of the lesson plans, instructional units, activities within Schoolnet. And then lastly, assessments. This is where you'll find under tests, is where you'll find tests you've created. You also have the create button there for tests. Items, rubrics, and passages, that's where we find instructional items or assessment items. And then we also have co-authoring. This is where you can co-author a test, work with a colleague, anyone in the state, to work together on a test. So we're going to go under instructional materials, and we're going to go under find materials. That's kind of our next stop that we'll go on our tour of Schoolnet here. All right, how are we doing? Good on questions?
Good on questions for right now.
Awesome. So instructional materials, Schoolnet is going to remember what subjects and grade levels I teach, so that you'll find that those are automatically selected for you. I'm just going to unselect them for a second. I am in the training site, which has fewer instructional resources than production. So if you're in your live site, you may search and get a different number than you'll see me get. That's perfectly fine. That's just because there's not as many items in instructional materials on the training site. So you can search by subject or grade. You can look by your standard as well. And so I'm just going to look for fractions for an example. So with assessment items, we mostly have assessment items or test questions for our core subjects and our tested grades. But instructional materials, we really do have a great selection of materials for everybody, from health and PE, CTE, career technical education. There's a good mixture of instructional resources for everybody. So I just searched for fractions. Over here on my left are my search filters, so I can see what types of materials I have available to me. So if I'm looking for lesson plans, I can click on the lesson plans icon, and that's going to narrow that down to those 347 lessons. And then maybe let's say I only want to look at 5th grade. that's going to bring it down to those 122 items for me to look at. Multiplying fractions. That sounds like everybody's favorite. So there's an attachment here, which is the actual lesson plan. If I liked this lesson plan, I can schedule it, which will add it to my lesson planner. There's also an option to build an express test, which means that it will choose these standards down here below that are linked to the lesson plan and build me a quick assessment using those particular standards. I can also click on the save icon or the little heart. And what that does is if I go under instructional materials and go to my materials, which has the heart, I will see that lesson right there under my materials. So it's kind of like a save or a favorites. So all of these resources and materials within Schoolnet are free to use. They're under a free for education license. Some of them are also designed specifically by NCDPI and have been placed in Schoolnet. We have AIG lesson plans. If you search for IRP, that was the name of the project that designed a whole bunch of great AIG resources and lessons. So everything that's in Schoolnet is going to be free to use, even if it's got a link attached to it to an outside site. That's something that has been tagged as free for educational use. Now, of course, links always do change. So if you happen to find a link that's bad, let us know, and we're going to either update it or we will remove it from Schoolnet. But we do have a link checker that's supposed to be checking our links pretty frequently to make sure that it doesn't happen. So
okay, we've got 2 questions around Spanish items. How to find the Spanish items, and is there a way to avoid selecting questions that are in Spanish?
Yep, I will show that in just a couple of minutes when we get to our assessment items. So I've got one more thing to show in instructional materials, and then I'll talk about finding items, and we can talk about Spanish. All right, so the last thing I wanted to show is that if you look in the subjects for instructional materials, there's one called home-based training. Home-based training has lots of instructional resources about how to use Schoolnet. So in the production site, there's about 150 resources. These include things like PDFs of how to use Schoolnet, how to build an assessment. There's also quick videos within that home-based training. So if you're very new to Schoolnet and you really want to dig in more, I encourage you to look under instructional materials and click on home-based training. And in the training site, these resources aren't loaded. So if you're with me in the training site and you click on it, you won't see it. So I'm going to go under assessments now, and I'm going to show you my favorite tricks for finding items. So we're going to go under items, rubrics, and passages on the left side, and we're going to go under find. And this is part that's changed over the summer with the upgrade. So there's now 2 ways. Right here, we can either click on items or passages and linked items. So if you are an English language arts teacher, you're going to search for passages and linked items because you want those reading passages with the linked items. And Schoolnet's done a really good job this upgrade of making it so much easier to build an ELA test. So I'm very excited for you guys to see this. But for this example, I'm going to click on items. But if you're an ELA teacher, please make sure you click on passages and linked items. So I'm just going to click on items, and it's going to come up with a brand new experience. So again, Schoolnet remembers what subjects I teach. So I'm going to uncheck those boxes for this example, and also what grades I teach. And it's pretty deliberate why I'm unchecking my subject and grade. And that is because in North Carolina, our standard course of study includes our subject and grade level within our standards. So I do not need to worry about my grade level or my subject area because my standards have that information in there for me. And that's pretty important because Schoolnet, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to select item banks. Schoolnet has national item banks. So what that means is all the items in Schoolnet have been vetted and they have been aligned to North Carolina Standard Course of Study. But if I search for a specific grade level, I might be limiting my search to items that that could fit my standard, because maybe in California in 8th grade they teach world history, right? So if I'm looking, for world history that we teach in middle school in 6th and 7th grade, and I choose only 6th grade, then I'm going to be excluding those 8th grade items that are aligned to North Carolina standards. So I always say, don't worry about your grade or your subject level in a search. Just look for your standard. So let me take a minute to explain these item banks. So we have the first item bank is your personal bank. These are items you have created. So I don't have any items, so there's no need to worry about that. But as you build items over the course of using Schoolnet, your bank will always be available to you to reuse those items from year to year or test to test. The home-based training, that's only on the training site, and that's just for you to be able to kind of practice with what an item bank looks like and practice adding items to an item bank if you wish to. But the rest of these banks are the banks that you'll see in production. So 2013 to 2016, this is general content, all subject areas, all grade levels, and it includes a lot of our passages. As you can see, there's 2,100 passages in this item bank. It's a good multi-purpose bank of items. The next one is Certica. Certica is our national bank of items that Schoolnet pays to have imported and us to have access to. These are very good, rigorous items that have all been aligned to North Carolina Standard Course of Study. So I'm going to pick that bank too. The next two banks are specific to our career and technical educators. One's for middle school, that's the CTE Middle Bank, and then one's for high school, which is the NC-CTE Unsecured Bank. So if you are a career or technical educator, you're going to want to make sure you click on one of those two banks to look for items. The last two banks are banks that DPI maintains. One is Classroom Bank, which has classroom items that are meant for practicing for the EOGs or EOCs. So if you teach something that doesn't have an EOG or EOC, then you're not going to really want to use this bank because it won't have any questions that are applicable to you. The Released Items Bank is just simply that, the released items from 2018 on. So if you want to make a test with those released items, you can click on that bank to check it. So for this example, I'm just going to do these two banks up here, the Certica Bank and the 2013-2016 Schoolnet Items Bank. So I'm going to select my banks. And then down at the bottom left, there's that all filters. So for our questions about Spanish items or not finding Spanish items, we want to go ahead and click on this all filters in the bottom left corner. And so here we can filter by what type of item we want, if we just want multiple choice, or if we just want gridded, all of those different things. And then if we scroll down a little bit where it says item properties, we can see we can filter these items by the Bloom's level or the Webb's depth of knowledge, which is very handy because for our math friends, they have their Webb's levels of depth of knowledge on our EOC and EOG specification sheets released by DPI. So for example, I know that in 5th grade, there's 5% of the items are on the depth of knowledge of 3. and then I think it was about 40% are 2, and 50% are 1. So you can actually go through and sort the items in Schoolnet by these levels. That's another great way to make a test more rigorous for our advanced learners, would be to look for some higher level items. But here is the moneymaker right here, question language. So if I'm interested in just English items, check the English box. If, on the other hand, I just want Spanish items, check Spanish. So there's your way to sort however you want to sort, whether you want just English items or you want just Spanish items, whichever one applies to you. Just use that question language. So I'm going to choose just English for this example, and I'm going to apply the filter. And you see it excluded the 30,000 Spanish items. So before I go into standards, are there questions?
So Pam, there was a question back with the instructional materials, how to find AIG lessons again.
Yep, so you're just going to type in IRP in the search for the lessons, and that'll bring them all up. And I'm sorry, my mind is blanking at 7 o'clock about what IRP stands for, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Pam, I also found AIG lessons if you type AIG in under your search results. I found several in math and ELA.
I know that is a tag, but I know the IRP is the specific tag that they use for that, for those specific projects. But yes, AIG is also another good search term. So I've got about 74,000 items to look at. No big deal, right? I'm going to narrow this down some more by selecting my standards. So on the left side, I'm going to click on select standards. And here's where I'm going to pick my subject area. So, normally when classes start, Schoolnet's going to have this information selected for me. So let's go ahead and look at math and 5th grade. All right, and so these are the North Carolina standards. I click on the little carets to open them up so I can see the specific objectives, right? So let's see, I want to use fractions to model and solve division problems. All right, so if I click on this plus icon, it's going to add that standard and everything beneath it, right? So I've got those. And once you can select multiples, and if there's a standard that you pick that you're like, oh, maybe not, you can use the little trash can icon. So then I'm going to save and close. And notice this is a prime example here of why you don't want to search with grade level. Because look, this item is aligned to our North Carolina 5th grade fraction standards, but in the item properties, it was actually a 7th grade item when it was written for Certica. So this is a good example of if I had my grade level only on 5th grade, I wouldn't have seen this item because it would have not appeared even though it was aligned to the standard, because I was only looking for specific 5th grade items. So if I see this item and I like it, I click on the little checkbox next to it and notice it turns green. And down at the bottom left corner, I have a shopping cart now with all of my items in them. So everyone loves a good pizza fraction question, right? So you're just going to go through, and this list is nice because it used to be that Schoolnet would load items and there'd only be, 25 items on the page. So if you were looking at 150 items, you would have to go all the way down to the bottom in a little box and expand out how many items per page, or you would be viewing items page by page. But now all of the items load in one frame. On the right-hand side of the item, you can see the item properties, such as, what level of depth of knowledge or blooms, how many exposures, which means how many times this item has been used within the state. So once I have a few items in my shopping cart, I can go under item actions and I can click add them to a test, right? So then it's going to ask me, do you want to add them to a test that you've already created, or do you want to create a new test with these items? So for this example, I'm going to create a new test. And it's going to give me a few pieces of information that I have to enter, right? So I'm going to put a sample test, and I'm going to have to choose a subject area, a grade level, and a standards document. So all these little things with the asterisks are required. I leave everything else as default except for underneath test settings. Here is where those accommodations live, right? So I want to make sure I enable those accommodations for the students in my room that need those accommodations and have them marked on their personal needs profile. So once I go through the add those accommodations, I'm ready to generate my test. So I'm going to stop here for this. I have a couple more slides of information. I do have a document that walks you through creating a test step by step that I'm going to show you in just a second. So if you're kind of like, oh, I need to know how to create the test, don't worry. We're going to share these resources with you. But I do know we're running close to time. So this PowerPoint or slide deck, Google slide deck, has all types of screenshots for you to refer back to and additional information. And then on slide 21 of the deck, there are links to several resources, and all of these are PDFs with step-by-step instructions. How to create a test, what the different item types are. For the math folks, if you want to create your own items, we do have math formula editors with every symbol known within math. How to co-author assessments. So if you want to work together with some of your colleagues to create an assessment that you all can use. Very important step is to make sure you always make your own copy of the test. So never create a test and then give another teacher the passcode to use with their students, because their grades won't transfer over to their grade book, and then you'll have all of these random students who've taken the test on your reports. So always make sure that you use co-authoring to share an assessment and you make a copy of a test. And this document that's linked right here explains to you how to do that. I've gone over the test nav accommodations, but this document here kind of refreshes your memory on that. And then we also have a YouTube channel, which has some short instructional videos on Schoolnet. That's great to share. And of course, our webinar schedule. So when we're back in September with more information about reporting. All right, so what are our questions that have been coming in while I was talking?
So, Pam, do you know if there are any lessons that can be found actually in Spanish? So in the instructional materials?
There might be a handful, but I don't think there's very many.
Yeah, I've been searching for them and have not found any. If I find some, I will send you. I'll send you the breadcrumbs to find them.
Yeah, I think you might find a couple of like activities for students that are in Spanish.
Yeah,
but you're not going to find any actual like lesson plans that are written in Spanish.
It's more of how to teach and assess.
Right.
those that are taking Spanish courses. And then Richard, when Pam emails out their certificate, now it may take 5 business days to get that done. She'll send the link to the presentation. Pam, are you going to be sending a PDF of the presentation also?
No, it's just
Okay.
going to be the link that was shared in the presentation. So.
But you should be able to just go to File.
Mm-hmm.
Once you open up that link, go to File and pull down to Download, and you can download it as a PDF yourself once you get the link. And that's all the questions we have so far. Okay. Oh, what? No, I didn't scroll down. I'm sorry. Can co-authoring option be used over time, meaning make half the test in my team? Oh, absolutely. It's just not, co-authoring is just not like a Google document. You don't simultaneously edit.
Yeah, so, it's one person at a time. So
one at a time, but yes, that's the rationale behind it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yes. So each day that we have webinars, they're worth 1/10 of a CEU. It's just in a single day there, we just repeat the same webinar. So you can't get 3 CEUs for today if you attended all 3. So it's each separate webinar is worth 1/10 of a CEU, but you'll need to, check with your district about approving that type of credit. Your districts are the ones that actually approve whether it's a digital learning competency or it's general CEU or something else. So they're the final say is in your district.
All right. Yes, and if you have questions, you have my email address. I will also say that each district and charter school has a Schoolnet admin, so they're a great resource too. So I might point you back to them if it's a question that's kind of specific to your school or district. But thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us tonight, giving up part of your back to school time. And thank you, Jill and Kathy, for helping me with questions and with the chat. And we hope everyone has a great night.